This podcast is sponsored by Tusk, an open source non-ICO crypto project powered by community. Check them out on the web at tusk.network. That's TUSC.network. The Rob McNeely program is the nexus of cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and entrepreneurship. Now, welcome to the program. Today, I am really excited because I get to talk to one of my personal heroes. He is probably one of the most outspoken and prominent people and fixtures in the Bitcoin crypto world, and that's Jared Tate of Digibyte Coin. Jared, how are you today?
Doing fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. I appreciate
and I actually mean it when I say those things. So, you know, so many people, especially with the influencers and stuff in the space, they just kind of blow smoke. But I'm actually really serious. You guys have been doing really cool stuff. Your project's been around for a while now. So before we dive into some of the nitty gritty, I always like to get a little bit of background. Can you talk a little bit about who you are as a person? And then we can talk a little bit about what Digibyte's all about.
Yeah. So, you know, I've been in this space since I first discovered Bitcoin in 2012. Before that, I was very lucky and fortunate. My mother was a computer scientist, so she taught me how to build a website and build a computer by the time I was 10. And so I've always had a fascination with computers and computer science. So when I first discovered Bitcoin in 2012, I was blown away. And I was running around telling everybody, "Oh, this is the future. This is the future. This is amazing." And then, of course, people are like, "Oh, no, it's a Ponzi scheme. Don't be like Bernie Madoff," stuff like that. And I'm like, no, you really need to look into this. And after going through the core source code from 2012 through 2013, I had an idea. I'm like, hey, I think I could make some improvements to the core protocol, and I think we could make it faster, and I think we could make it a little bit more efficient. And that's how Digibyte started on January 10th, 2014. I honestly had no idea it would turn into what it is. I literally launched it from my garage in Idaho. It was the middle of the winter, so I was mining with GPUs, and that's how I was testing the network because, there was no insulation in the garage, so you didn't have to worry about cooling. And from there, we've just continued to innovate, and Digibyte has become an amazing grassroots, blockchain community. And so my hat's off to all the community members out there who are watching. Without them, none of this would be possible. And I think that's why we're all here in the beginning is true decentralization.
Well, that's one of the things I like about your project is that your community is absolutely one of the most excited and what I can see legitimate communities out there. A lot of projects will talk about their community size. And I can tell you as a project myself is that I personally believe a lot of the quote unquote community sizes around these projects are fake.
100%. I mean, a lot of you used to see it a lot more in 2017 before Twitter kind of cracked down. But yeah, I mean, tons of bots. I mean, and paid promotions, paid stuff like that, 100%. Which is funny because we've been accused of being a paid bot army.
Well, just so people understand, you wouldn't believe in how many people approach us with offering these services. We will add, so many, they'll come up with a whole sheet, a whole pitch deck of how many Telegram users they'll give you, how many Twitter followers they give you, all for in prices of Litecoin and Bitcoin and whatever else, And yeah. I tell people, we found recently as well with our project that a lot of the people that have come into crypto and a lot of these bounty hunter type people and a lot of these people that have these quote unquote big followings around their projects, just they're not real. It's all made up. But then, I talked to Verge recently, the Verge crypto project, and talked to you, and I can see with these communities that there's real response, there's real people asking real questions, not just paid for bots. And I do believe that it matters, but I think it's going to become a lot more important over the next couple of years as I believe crypto is going to have to change and grow, is that all this nonsense and all the fake volume and all the fake communities and stuff, that's got to wash away if mass adoption is going to happen.
100%. And as you're sitting there talking, I get those same offers almost on a daily basis. And in fact, I have a whole inbox. I should publish some of them just so people see how ridiculous this space actually kind of is, whether it's paid social media promotion, paid followers, or even worse, I get offers probably at least every 2 or 3 days from people saying that they'll increase volume, they'll make it look like, and a lot of them are coming from exchanges overseas. But I think a lot of people just aren't aware of how much hype and just marketing and fake, fake stuff that's out there. And it's really dramatically changed since 2017. I mean, you had this whole wave of people that came in 2017, and they were drawn to this marketing hype and these projects that they don't really understand a lot of times are completely centralized and controlled by either, maybe just a single person or a handful of people.
The fake volume thing is really interesting too. Like, especially and it seems to be, and I'm not calling it out to be mean, but a lot of these Asian exchanges, these smaller Asian exchanges, they'll say, look at how big our exchange is. You should come on and pay us, 510 BTC to come onto their platform. And we're like, okay, but CoinGecko says your volume's all fake. Well, no, it's not fake. But then they'll say, oh, by the way, if you come on our network and you don't maintain minimum volume, you have to fake your own volume. So which is it? Is it fake? Are your users real and your volume real? Or are you literally just, doing your own market making and wash trading on these projects? And it bugs me because I'm an honest guy, right? I would hate to have low volumes, but I'd rather have low volumes on trading on my project than have fake trading, because that's fraud. And to me, inherently fraud is bad.
Yeah. Well, I'm not opposed to calling it out. It is predominantly Chinese, Asian based exchanges. I lived in China for 4 years. I'm well aware of the way that, a lot of the Chinese operate their businesses. And the reality is we're seeing this not just in crypto, but I mean, across the board. There's a reason this trade war is unfolding the way it is, because they haven't been playing fair anywhere. I mean, the reality is they do have a different set of values over there. And if for instance, I created an exchange in 2014, never launched it. And the reason we never launched it is because we wanted to do it in a properly regulated manner. And at the time, I actually talked with the guy who underwrote the bonds for PayPal. And he's like, look, man, you're going to spend $3 million trying to go and get money transmission licenses in 47 out of the 50 states, plus applying and doing all the Fed stuff, So the burden of regulation is very overwhelming in the United States, especially for a startup. And the reality is in Asia, they just don't have those same rules to play by. And so if I myself had gone out and operated the same way in an exchange starting in 2014 that a lot of these Asian exchanges had, I would have been in jail years ago.
It's pretty crazy. So you've been pretty outspoken about dealing with exchanges, most notably Binance, which is, at this point, at the time of this recording, is the biggest exchange in the world right now, at least purportedly. What happened? What happened there with you guys, and your listing with Binance?
It all goes back to 2017 before they even launched. In the summer of 2017, we were presenting Digibyte in our international trade and logistics solution called DigiSign at this event called the City Tech for Integrity Challenge. And at the time, it was probably the most covered, followed thing that was happening in crypto because it was a bit of a summer lull. And so we had a massive amount of attention. And what ended up happening is one day I started seeing these tweets about a new exchange, which, it's pretty common. You see that all the time, especially as long as we've been around. I mean, I think we've got Digibyte listed on probably 150 exchanges over the last 6 years, and probably a good 50 of those have come and gone and are no longer around. So, it wasn't abnormal for a new exchange to come in, but what was abnormal were the amount of, likes and retweets and stuff this thing was getting. It was obvious it was bots, right? Well, so some of our community members had conversations back and forth. Binance put out this tweet saying, hey, who should we add next? How about Digibyte? At the time, we won, and we're like, cool. Well, next thing you know, some of our people start talking to the Binance people, and they're like, well, you need to pay us. And, this went back and forth for a few months. And, finally we're like, hey, we're a decentralized project. We didn't do an ICO. It's been true grassroots. Like we flat out don't have the money to pay you. And the fact is they wouldn't even give us an amount, and I posted screenshots of all this in 2018. Anybody can go back and look at it. Basically they're like, how much do you got? There's basically straight up extortion, right? And then they started spreading rumors about me and other people in the community, basically trying to strong arm us into doing a community, raise to get a bunch of money, right? And I was just fundamentally opposed to that, and it really upset me that I was getting accused of. Well, first of all, I got accused of being a Chinese spy on WeChat, which made no sense. I'm like, I don't even use WeChat, But anyway, then I started finding out that these same stories were coming from other projects and other founders. And then unfortunately, a lot of these other projects just, basically, I guess, succumbed to it, or they did an ICO and they had the money and they paid them. So it just, because so many people went along with it, it just exacerbated the problem and made it worse. And in my opinion, that behavior of this pay-to-play ICO frenzy, set this industry back years. And then finally, in the interest of moving forward, and, I'm not a negative person. I like to think I'm a very optimistic, positive person. But, when I continually see this behavior over and over again, after we tried to, I guess, quote unquote, bury the hatchet, later this year, they actually approached us right before the Binance US launch. And, I was told, I didn't even agree to take the phone call or the video call. I'm like, look, if they're going to ask or demand for anything, I don't want to talk to them. If they want to list Digibyte and they want to support true decentralized projects, that's great. Anybody is free to list Digibyte at any time they want. But, I got on the phone call with them and it wasn't even 60 seconds into it. They're like, well, we'll list you for $300,000. And I'm like, what? You got to be kidding me. First of all, we don't even have $300,000 for a marketing budget to pay anything. We've never paid to be on an exchange. And then secondly, they asked us to give them 3% of all the Digibyte in circulation. And it blew me away. The fact that either they were that arrogant or the fact that they were that naive of how a truly decentralized project works, which I think it was the arrogant, to be honest. And so, after that, I'm like, look, the community needs to know this. And if you look at the stuff and the information that they have repeatedly done, it's like, oh, they're going to have a DEX, a decentralized exchange. It's not decentralized. Oh, they're going to take listing fees and give them a charity. Yeah, a charity that they control. It's just shenanigans after shenanigans. And, I want to be clear here. Like when I talk about doing business in China, I don't think all Chinese people are bad. I have some great friends that are Chinese. I think they're good people. But the business practices that are basically normal over there, to I think a normal Westerner, they just quite don't understand it. But I can tell you, after seeing some of the same behaviors in the manufacturing industry, in other technology businesses over there outside of crypto, it's the way business is done. It's a very cutthroat, dog eat dog, fake it till you make it environment.
Well, my experience has been the same way. And so I don't know if you know what we're doing with Tusk, but we started out as a ERC20 token and we actually created our own blockchain and we just did our swap. So we are fully decentralized and we never did an ICO. So we didn't have all this ICO money either. And it's interesting because I started recently, I've been talking to exchanges again. And I'm seeing the same nonsense. Like I had someone literally, their reported volume is $1 billion. It's an Asian exchange, and their actual normalized volume is about $3 million of their trade volume. They asked me for 5 BTC for one pair and 2% of our entire supply. I said, I don't even have access to 2% of our supply. So, yeah. And it's like they're having a hard time understanding that we don't control that. It was distributed. The community owns the coins, not us. And I just said, and you point this out, I go, well, and I really like CoinGecko as far as a tracker. They're trying to make some real good headway in how they're, displaying the sizes and the normalized volumes, and they compare to things like web traffic. And it's funny because I talked to this sales rep. I'm not going to say which exchange, but it's a decent sized exchange. And I said, look, your web traffic is about 1/3 of what all the other exchanges are that have your stated volume, or a half or a tenth. Or it was ridiculous. He's like, oh, they're just wrong.
Yeah, no.
Like, okay.
For those who might be more interested in this, General Spalding, I think he was one of the former Joint Chiefs of Staff, just came out with an amazing book called Stealth War. He's a former B-52 pilot, and he was the defense attaché to Beijing. And he goes into a lot about these kind of tactics, not just in, you know, technology businesses, but other businesses. Basically, almost any industry, when it comes to trade between the United States and Europe and Western nations and China, you see these same sorts of behaviors and deceptions. And you really can't trust a lot of the numbers that are coming out of there in any industry. And so that's really what it boils down to. So yeah, it's not surprising at all. I mean, I actually ignore them. I mean, like we were talking earlier, I should start posting some of these offers that I get from these agent exchanges, you know, either paying for volume or paying for a listing or promising XYZ. And, you know, it came out even on Binance, like they're, you know, there's several people that are like, yeah, you got to pay for your own volume on there. You know, I mean, it's a total hype cycle. I mean, their business model wasn't trading. Their business model was basically listing fees and strong arming people up front, you know, and hey, people were paying it and they got away with it. But, you know, I really don't see them being viable. You know, I've seen exchanges come and go like this. I mean, this kind of behavior, I mean, the fact that they've ran from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction, well, they start out in China, moved to Hong Kong, then Singapore, then Japan. And then now they moved to Malta. Who knows where they're operating out of? They're operating in a gray area, you know, they can't go on with like that forever. So anyway, like I said, I like to think I'm a positive person, but I also didn't get into this industry. And I guess at this point I've dedicated the better part of my adult life to this technology. And so I can't just sit idly by and let this technology be hijacked and completely perverted from what it was created for. But unfortunately, we see that happening. And, you know, that's the whole reason that I spent the last 16 months writing this book, Blockchain 2035.
You beat me to it. I was about to ask you about that. What is Blockchain 2035 all about?
Well, so, you know, I first outlined it in 2015, but, you know, over the last, especially since I created Digibyte, 6 years, I've been asked questions by thousands of people. I've sat down with pretty much every major financial institution. I've sat down with governments. I've sat down with central banks, and there's a lot of the same questions. So I'm like, look, if I can put all the information that I know and try and put it in one book, you know, when it comes to blockchain technology, this is why we created it. I would say 95% of this book is about, you know, the future of the internet, geopolitics, and technology. Only about 5% is actually about Digibyte. You know, we split the book into 4 parts. We have the, let me go back here. So part 1 is kind of like the basics, you know, the story of Digibyte. Part 2 is what we call the philosophy and the philosophers. Part 3 is the applications, and part 4 is the future. So we go over everything from, you know, how blockchain can rebuild the internet from the ground up, to how governments are using it and weaponizing this in geopolitics. We talk about the history of cryptography and how blockchain didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's actually the evolution of some of the most brilliant mathematical minds, going back to like Alan Turing and Claude Shannon in 1948. And then we also talk about the future with artificial intelligence and quantum computing and how that's going to affect blockchain. So it's a very dynamic book. You know, I co-authored it with my business partner, Andrew, who's actually a former intelligence analyst who specialized in counterterrorism. So we've got that perspective in it too. So it's a very dynamic book. So actually, I just got a huge shipment. So if anybody wants to order the hard copy, if you go to blockchain2035.com, you can get it there.
You know, I don't even need to ask you questions. So what would you say, give me the highlights overview. What does blockchain look like in 2035?
Well, you know, the reality is we're at a crossroads in technology right now. And the gist of the book is if we don't use blockchain technology to take back control of our own data and our own privacy, our privacy is going to be continued to be eroded, and we're going to be living in a technocracy where a handful of mega corporations are using AI systems, surveillance systems to measure everything about us. We make the example, why does your washing machine really need to know which clothes you wore that day and how many times you've worn them? Why does your toaster need to know how many times that you've made a certain kind of bread, right? I mean, all this information, all this data is slowly eroding our privacy. So with blockchain technology, specifically applied to cybersecurity, and I've said this time and time again, properly applied blockchain technology can fix 95% of today's cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Hacks are becoming more and more prevalent. There's a chance that as we're sitting here, both of our data is probably in the process of being compromised somewhere, just because it's out there, and our local governments, especially in America, do not take the proper steps to safeguard this data and information. And this problem is going to get much worse. But there is hope on the horizon, and that's what we try to get across in this book, is this future where by the year 2035, you can use blockchain technology to secure everything from all the personal devices in your home, from your phone to your router to your TV, to even your healthcare records and much more. And we should be voting so we can have completely transparent, honest elections to mitigate a lot of the fraud there. That's the future that we want to strive for, and we believe in. So that's the gist of the book. Because on the flip side, when I was in Beijing in 2016, speaking at a Chinese conference, I was slated between two Chinese researchers. And they presented this vision that has now become the digital renminbi. And their entire architecture, literally the chart on their board, showed their blockchain with a central hub that could control everything. And so when you were talking about earlier, this idea that they were blown away that you didn't have 2% of the supply, they literally, I think as a group and as a culture, see the future of blockchain as a way to control the economics of the rest of the world.
Well, my take is, and I tell people who are cheerleading China's all of a sudden, the Chinese government decided that they love blockchain now. I said, this is not something to cheerlead. This is not something to laud, because if you know one iota about the Chinese government and the Communist Party there is that anything they can do, anything they support will be to their benefit of centralized control of people. It'll be the exact opposite of what the ethos, at least I come from with blockchain and decentralization. It's the opposite. They want to be able to, control people as much as possible. And if you think they're going to, all of a sudden embrace some technology that gives up some power to their government, you're out of your mind. They are weaponizing this, and they're going to weaponize it against their people. And I think they're going to export that weaponization outside of their, normal domain of operation.
Yeah, 100%. I literally saw the slides. Part of it was in Chinese, but it was pretty apparent what it was in 2016. They had a map of the whole One Belt, One Road initiative. And as soon as they roll out this digital renminbi, they're going to be able to use that to exert control from ports throughout Africa, through Europe, and across the land route, in Eurasia. And that's their plan.
Well, if you think about it, at least of what I know about, how business is done in China, every major corporation over there has basically a liaison or an attaché that sits at the company, almost like a commissar.
No, it's required by law. It's required under Chinese law that there has to be a party member on the board.
An overseer, really. And that's what I tell people. It's like, same thing with mining, the Chinese are mining illegal in Bitcoin. I'm like, no, they're not. You don't get access to hydropower in the Ganges Dam in China if the Communist Party isn't, excited about the process.
I know people. I met people when I was inside of China that were doing that, and they told me straight up the government was sponsoring it. Same with the mining hardware manufacturers, 100%.
So, and to me, it's funny, you were talking about, IoT kind of stuff. I don't even have a Ring. I don't have a Nest. I don't have any kind of smart devices in my house. I don't even bring the technology into my house. And it's funny because people laugh at me. And I said, you know what? All I can assume is what I know about most of this hardware is that it's pretty much insecure and it's surveillance technology.
Oh, it's all surveillance technology, right? I went to Whole Foods today and they asked me to scan the QR code so they know exactly what food I'm getting, what I'm eating. And I told the lady, I'm like, so what are they going to do with this data in 5 years? Are they going to start selling it to insurance companies, trying to predict, what diseases I'm going to come down with because of what food I'm eating? This is what I'm saying. We're heading towards this era of complete surveillance technocracy, and if we don't stand up and start doing something to thwart this and take control of our own privacy and our own data, we may be too late. That's a huge part. I mean, chapter 2 is a revolution in ownership, taking ownership of our own data, our own money, our own information, and actually using that to make money. I mean, sure, if somebody wants to reveal what food purchases they are, they should get a little reward for that. If they want to reveal what clothes they're actually wearing and washing to their IoT washing machine, okay, well, they should get paid for that. But at least encrypt their data and their information using something like a zero knowledge proof, or some other sort of innovative cryptographic mathematical technology. But
and I think really, like with the Brave browser, they're pioneering that concept, and I'm like, okay, I'll watch these, I'll click on an ad every now and then. I'm getting free BAT. At least, I have control over that, and I can shut that off when I want to. And you know what? If you think about it, they're just being a little less greedy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they're sharing.
Yeah, you look at like.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was going to say, as you look at YouTube and some of these other centralized, content creation portals, they've just really gotten outrageously greedy.
Yeah, no, for sure. And in the political bias is becoming ever more apparent. And now, I just saw the idea that they're blocking all content regarding vaccines on was it Facebook? I mean, I'm not saying everything's truthful. We all know there's fake news, but to completely censor something just because one group of people believes it's right. I mean, it's amazing how much I've seen, First Amendment rights in the United States be eroded in the last 2 years. It's scary.
Well, like where we're coming from with the project, I actually don't even have any interest in being on centralized exchanges at all. But I would much rather just be on DEXs and atomic swap apps and things like that. But the problem is, as a project, you don't get credit for that, because
Right.
the way projects are evaluated right now in the United States and globally is what their market cap is on certain exchanges, which to me is really a dumb way to measure a project, but that's how we view it right now. And to me, I'm moving toward, like, in my mind, it's all about the privacy and decentralization aspect, where it seems that the heavyweight players that are coming into this space, all about centralization. It's like, I get I'm always a naysayer, but I think it's just because I think things differently, and I look at things longer term, like the laws in Wyoming,
Right. They're doing great stuff. Yeah.
Actually, I was going to say, I don't like anything they're doing up there for the most part,
Really?
but I also used to know some of the people involved politically up there when I lived in Wyoming. But here's the thing. If you look at the laws up there, what they're doing, they're trying to make it so Wyoming is Wall Street for crypto and for crypto banking. And to me, I don't want the states to get involved. I know they will, but I'm saying is, if you think about it, they're trying to make it so it's about being a competitor to Wall Street. And basically it's all about centralization and physical custody and things of that nature. And to me, that's not where we need to be focusing our efforts. Our focus should be decriminalizing and changing the way things like the IRS treats crypto transactions. To me, I believe that personally is where people should be putting their energy politically, because I do believe that the IRS treatment of crypto is probably going to be the #1 impediment to adoption, especially by retailers. And I know that because I talk to retailers, and when they start hearing about the accounting things they have to deal with to be compliant with accepting crypto, they're not interested. That's one of the biggest turnoffs. But yet most projects aren't even involved. We're so far away from adoption in most cases that objection isn't even being talked about by people yet.
Yeah.
They always talk about the SEC, and realistically, to me, 2 years ago, when we started looking at the SEC laws, when we were thinking about doing an ICO originally, and we started looking, this actually does apply pretty, if you look at the SEC, in my opinion, the SEC actually do apply pretty straightforward to crypto. Now, a lot of crypto people will say they don't. I believe they do. It's pretty obvious when you read the case studies in this area of law. It's pretty obvious that, this is what it is. But what doesn't fit in my mind is the IRS. And you don't hear really people bitching about that yet. And I think you will.
Yeah.
But to me, it's about getting away from the state and empowering people. And when you start talking about, oh, this state's doing this and that. And I'm like, I don't care what the state's doing. I want to, get out of the way. We don't need the state to, help crypto. We need the state to get out of the way of crypto. Which of course, when it comes down to, I don't think our government's going to do that either.
Well, yeah, I mean, the inner libertarian in me 100% agrees with you, right? But from my understanding of Wyoming, that they were trying to allow people to basically be in control of their own assets, because I see kind of two regulatory approaches and frameworks forming in the United States. You have the New York crowd, which is trying to push everybody down the traditional broker-dealer route in these clearinghouses and maintain their monopoly that they already have. And then Wyoming, which is actually saying, hey, no, people should be able to in charge and take control of their own stuff. So that's been my perspective on it. But I do, as a libertarian, agree. Hey, we should be able to do what we're doing as long as we're not harming anybody else.
Well, I'm a wonk when it comes to reading laws, because of my day job. I deal with a lot of law stuff because I'm an expert witness, so I have to read laws. And I used to be very politically active. I could get the bill for you, but one of the laws in Wyoming, if you want to maintain the protection of the state, you actually have to disclose all your digital assets to the state. Okay. So there's a little, I'll put it this way. There's always a gotcha.
Right. There's some little gotchas in there. Yeah.
There's always
gotchas. Tax it, right? Yeah. Well, I guess there is no income tax in Wyoming, but.
Well, there's all sorts of taxes. There's all sorts of taxes. There's not an income tax yet, but there probably will be eventually. But here, I'm not here to rag on Wyoming. I'm always skeptical. I just get skeptical, because people say, oh, I really like what X is doing. And then you're like, okay, did you look at the law itself? Did you read the bill?
And you're right. I didn't actually read the bill. So
no one reads the bill. No one reads the bills. And I always read the bills. I'll give you a great example. I'm a gun guy, and our project's really kind of in the gun space too. And so, Wyoming had a firearm freedoms bill they were trying to pass a few years back when we lived up there. And the thing is, it was basically a bill, and it sounded great. It's pro-gun. It's excited. All the gun owners excited. And the whole concept was that it would make it so if you made a gun in Wyoming, you didn't have to comply. Basically, you could not comply with federal law if you didn't take it outside the state of Wyoming, which is amazing. But the problem is there is nothing in the bill for the state to protect you from the federal government if you did that. So it was a really good sounding bill. It was a feel-good bill, but it didn't actually have any teeth, and it didn't actually give the support needed. So it never amounted to anything. So I always say it's like, anytime you start looking at laws, you got to read the devil's always in the details, and look at the requirements. And so for instance, in Wyoming, the token bill, there was a gotcha on they had a utility, their first one, or one of the first ones, with the utility token law. But the problem is with the utility tokens, their bill, it says there was a gotcha. And the gotcha, and that was that if you make your utility token available for purchase as an investment, it basically nullifies the protections. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that if you put it on an exchange, making it available as an investment, you now nullified all the laws or the protections of the bill. So it sounds good, right? But then when you look at the bill, it doesn't do what people say it does. Right. And I know a lot of people. I was very politically active in Wyoming, so I know a lot of policy wonks up there, and so we have a lot of conversations about these things. So things aren't always what you think they are. Right. Yeah. So I agree with that. And it always comes down to also, when is that law tested, and what happens at that point. And we haven't had
to fall on the knife for it.
Well, we haven't had any of those laws tested at this point. So it's like it's unproven how it's going to be, how it's going to play out. I mean, and I know a lot about the cannabis laws in Colorado. There's, the devil's always in the details, Now, you got these super high taxes for, Amendment 64, which now makes it so the black market is thriving because the taxes on recreational weed are so expensive. It's cheaper to buy illegally. So, it didn't solve that problem, which was what it was supposed to do. It's always devil in details, but going
back to a point you made earlier, I wanted about market caps. We actually have a whole chapter dedicated to evaluating and vetting a project. And we started off with something we call the market cap fallacy, and how it's an absolutely horrible metric of evaluating a project. And we go through several pages explaining why and examples. So it's something I wanted to point out there, because what you said before about market caps, people just go and say, hey, I want to look at the top 10 or 15. First of all, You have projects that are actually unique and decentralized. And we actually separated chapter 9, a survey of existing blockchain protocols, chapter 10, a survey of existing projects. And we differentiate that a project is built on an independent protocol, but independent protocols are independent. And when you look at the CoinMarketCap, like top 50, there's really only maybe like a dozen actually independent protocols, right? A lot of them are ERC20 tokens or stable coins or other things that should never be compared to truly decentralized independent protocols because they don't have the same value. So we go into that in chapter 11. So I just wanted to mention
well,
that.
I think it's important. And I come back, I'm an entrepreneur. So, you know, I am not a developer. I look at things like, you know, marketing plan, team, how it's managed, how are they solving problems, and whose problems are they solving? Those are the things that I look at. I'm just kind of, you know, I always look at risk mitigation and things like that. And it's interesting. And this is why I'm actually bearish on a lot of the top 100. I'm really bearish on, because if you look at who's running these projects, it's people that don't have any background in running a project or a business, or, you know, taking something to market. And most of them just got a lot of inertia from their initial ICO push, and they're still riding. I think a lot of these projects are just riding that initial ICO, you know, kind of inertia. But I think ultimately, in my mind, eventually projects are going to have to be evaluated based on the number of people that are willing to pay to use them, or are using them for a utilitarian purpose and not just speculating.
Yeah.
It has to happen.
Well, a lot of these ICOs, they're still paying for their own markets. They're still hiring people to sit there and wash trade and increase their market cap. But, you know, we actually, similar to what you said, we came up with what we call the blockchain 2035 rubric. Basically, what chance does this project still have to be around in the year 2035? And we identified basically 5 areas: the economic model and the vision, which consensus algorithm that it's built upon or protocol, the number of actual full nodes on the network, the age of the protocol or the project, and then what kind of governance model and team. And then we go through and we actually talk about several areas to give people pointers where to go look at for that. So anyway, that's, you know, some good stuff. But yeah, I definitely agree with you on that.
So one of my last questions are, based on input from your community, what are you doing about quantum computing and the risks that quantum computing, you know, pose to blockchains in the future?
So that is the very last chapter in the book. We call it the quantum leap. And we actually start off with a quote from Donald Rumsfeld about the unknown unknowns. And, you know, the reality is there's a lot of things we don't truly know yet. And there are no, so I guess we got to differentiate here. So, you know, first of all, we give a little background in explaining what exactly quantum computing is, right? And I think a lot of people don't quite grasp the magnitude of the leap that quantum will be. You know, because what it really means is, you know, we're going from just on or off the transistor 0 or 1, I don't know, bits in binary, to an exponential amount of possibilities in our system. So our entire ecosystem and code stack and everything that's been built since World War II has to be rebuilt from the ground up with quantum computing, right? And so we haven't even standardized what languages there are, what formats this work. The way I compare it is the biggest advent in the digital era after Claude Shannon's information theory. You know, because at the end of the World War II, we had the ability to measure time, we could measure distance, we could measure weight, but we couldn't measure information, right? And then once he came up with that theory, and then once the transistor was developed at Bell Labs, that's when we had our leapfrog exponential moment into the digital revolution, right? We haven't really had that moment with quantum computing yet. So because we haven't had that moment, we haven't had the ability to actually truly test and understand quantum, true quantum algorithms, right? So there really is none out there. But what we do have is what people are calling, you know, quantum resistant algorithms. And there's been an effort by NIST, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, to create a next generation quantum resistant algorithm. And there's been several proposals. It's an ongoing process. And the leader of that so far that looks promising is something called Sphinx. Sphinx Plus, which could be used to replace SHA-256 and other algorithms. And we've actually looked at potentially adopting that earlier on with Digibyte. However, because it is more complex and computationally extensive, it would dramatically slow down sync and validation times with the core wallet. So there's a trade-off. That algorithm hasn't been, I guess, formally standardized, but it is supported by people like, for instance, Ralph Merkle, who invented public-private key cryptography, and who's also the founder of the Merkle tree data structure in a blockchain. So he's, in my opinion, one of the wisest guys around, and he's still here giving us insights and help. So there's really a lot of unknowns right now.
Well, I was going to say that one of the reasons I actually oppose putting personalized information on the web, including medical information and including things like gun registrations, which I've heard, from a few different places, is that at some point I do believe that, SHA-256 will be broken. And it probably isn't that far away, next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And that's a much bigger problem if personal information is on the blockchain. And this is something I think about. And my wife's a medical doctor, so understand that we talk about, and she's one of our co-founders, so we talk a lot about blockchain and medical applications, and we've both come out saying we don't want medical stuff on blockchain at all, or personal information, because think of it this way, and again, unless you have a quantum resistant kind of system, maybe that would change this, but under the current SHA-256 algorithm encryption protocols that everybody's using right now, if you have a normal data breach with health records, generally it's one location, it gets leaked to the dark web, but it's not widespread typically. They're trying to sell the data, they're just not giving it away for free. The problem is, if you have certain, private information spread across thousands of nodes on a blockchain, and all of a sudden your encryption just gets opened up to the wild, now that genie is really all over the place, and there's no way that that's going to limit the exposure of that data, whereas at least with normal data breaches as they are now, typically the data is not widespread, whereas I think it'd be a much bigger mess if let's just say a blockchain with information like that on it was exposed. I mean, what would you think about that?
Well, first of all, I think you're confusing two subjects, right? So SHA-256 is a hashing algorithm. It's one way, right? So when you hash something, you're not actually storing that data on the blockchain.
Right.
So when we talk about cracking a SHA-256 hash and exposing private keys for a wallet, that's completely different than something when it comes to like your health history records that could be encrypted with something like AES, right? So those are kind of two different approaches there. So I do think that what we have now is relatively, I'm never going to say anything's 100% absolute, because there's always, the unknown unknowns. But I do think we're at a phase, specifically by either using SHA-512 or adding something like Sphinx Plus for protecting assets themselves and using the hashing ability of information into the blockchain. I think that's perfectly safe. I do. Because I think that's one of the biggest misnomers a lot of people get confused on, is when you're actually anchoring into a chain some information, you're anchoring a mathematical proof of that information and not the information itself. So there's no way of ever actually getting that data if you're just hashing it onto the chain, if that makes sense. Unless
it makes sense to me.
Locally exposed. And that's actually what we're working on, expanding a little bit more with DigiAssets to make that a little bit wider known, because, things like that, or for instance, like what we're doing with DigiID to use your private keys to replace passwords, there's a lot of features and cryptographic use cases that I believe are super under leveraged when it comes to blockchain technology. But, going back to the quantum question, I do believe that centralized systems, banks, stuff like that are going to get hit way before, blockchains will, because even with SHA-256, the theoretical limit, it depends on the algorithm that you use to crack it, right? So there's two algorithms that have been theorized that have been possible to make it easier to crack a lot of these cryptographic hashes. There's Shor's algorithm and Grover's algorithm, and they're different approaches. And currently, so when we talk about qubits, it's basically how many different states there are potential logic gates, right? D-Wave Systems just sold a 5,000 qubit machine to Los Alamos National Laboratory.
Right.
Now, not all quantum computing machines are the same. They're not. There's basically two different types. One of them is more stable. That's more for general purpose computing, kind of like the CPU in your computer. And then the other one's kind of like an ASIC, right? So the D-Wave system is kind of like an ASIC. It's only really good for like a specific thing. Whereas like what Google's 50 qubit machine is for general purpose quantum computing. And those are the ones we really have to be worried about, right? But some of the theoretical numbers say that if we hit a 5,000 qubit machine, that could crack SHA-256 and expose private keys for like Bitcoin funds. But that's theoretical. I mean, nobody's done it. But the reality is the people that are working on this are the biggest governments on the planet.
Well, I was going to say the people that have access to that technology are going to be state actors and probably intelligence and military actors. And they're not going to tell you if they cracked it, probably.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is where we talk about the unknown unknowns, right? All we can continue doing is building systems based upon the open source scientific data and information out there, which I am a believer in open source movements. I do believe an open source academic mathematical movement is always going to supersede anything that's done in a private corporation or some back rooms of a government, because I think the collective mind of humanity is always going to be stronger than a few isolated individuals who can't share and collaborate.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We're getting close on time here, Jared. So where can people find out more about you, Digibyte, and Blockchain 2035?
Well, so if you want to know a little bit more about me, we talk about it in the book. So if you go to blockchain2035.com, we talk about our stories, how we ended up in the situation writing this book, and how I started, how I got involved with Digibyte and blockchain. If you're looking to find out more about Digibyte, go to digibyte.io. You can hit us up on the Telegram chat. We have a super passionate, active, helpful community. I'm not a CEO. I'm not in charge of anything. Nobody gets paid to work on Digibyte. I mean, it's a completely grassroots, decentralized project. So we warmly welcome everybody to come check us out and get involved. And if you want to be a part of something, whether it's building on top of the Digibyte protocol or helping contribute to core, there's tons of things that we have going on right now. So,
Jared, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Rob McNeely program. Make sure you check us out on the web at robmcneely.com and subscribe to our podcast at YouTube, iTunes, and on the Google Play Store.